From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, Professor of English and American Culture Studies and the Director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations present and past who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the Indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Today, my guests are Dr. Susan Finn and Judy Budi. Welcome. Dr. Finn received her bachelor's degree in education from BGSU, a master's in public health nutrition from Case Western Reserve University, and a PhD in nutrition science from The Ohio State University. She recently published a book titled Nutrition Authority: Perspectives on Opportunity. Judy Budi graduated from BGSU with a degree in dietetics and earned her master's in nutrition from Case Western Reserve University. In 2019, she was appointed the president and CEO of GraceWorks Lutheran Services, a Dayton, Ohio-based nonprofit. She is also a member of the BGSU Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
To begin, we love to hear about your own professional journeys and kind of what some of those major forks in the road were that got you to kind of where you are today. And specifically, maybe you could tell us about how you first became interested in dietetics and nutrition, and what have been some of those major transitions in your lives and careers since first arriving here as BGSU students. Susan, would you start us off?
Well, sure. That's a big question.
It is.
I started to be interested in dietetics very early. I was interested always in food. And in high school, I remember we had to do a paper on what we wanted to do our senior year in high school. And I wrote it on dietetics and then went and spoke to the head of our school food service that ran it for Berea Public Schools, which is where I grew up. So I had a very specific interest in it. And of course, I came to Bowling Green, where it was basically home economics. And there was not really a dietetics program or a concentration. So I ended up with a bachelor's degree in home ec education. I loved it. I had a wonderful time with it. I student taught. I was prepared to do that. And all of a sudden, I thought, I'm from Cleveland. I'm going to see what else there might be. And so I looked in the newspaper, and there was an opportunity for a home economist to work in Cleveland associated with Metropolitan General Hospital. And so I took that road, and the rest is history. I went on to get a master's in public health from Case Western. I was prepared to do public health work, then decided, I'm going to go get the PhD because I really love teaching. And I went to Ohio State, received my degree there, and I thought, I'm going to teach. And I taught out in California for a bit. And then all of a sudden, I went to industry. And I spent 30 years as the chief nutritionist at Abbott Laboratories. And so it was very different than I prepared for as I started here in the 60s at home economics education.
What was your story, Judy?
Well, mine's actually different. I actually didn't even know dietetics was a degree until I came to Bowling Green. So I came here. I thought initially I wanted to be a home economics teacher, but the sewing part was not for me. So I enjoyed the food and I enjoyed the science. So I came to Bowling Green to be a science teacher and started looking at the curriculum, and astrology and geology weren't really it. And actually my next door neighbor from Founders Hall was in my chemistry and biology class, and we started talking. She told me she was going to study dietetics, and I was like, I've never heard of it. So I went home that Christmas, went to meet with a dietitian at the hospital, similar to you, actually meeting somebody in the field and learning about it. And I came back and changed my degree to dietetics. So one of the professors encouraged me to apply to Case Western and the coordinated master's program with the VA. She said it really has a good food service management component. And I kind of looked at her because I'd never really had envisioned myself working in management, but she encouraged me in that way. So I guess there was some indication to her then that that might be a field that I would be attracted to. And I did that program, and I worked for Aramark, which is a food service management company, in 3 different hospitals over a course of about 10 years. And then I got to a point where the hospital was really looking to reduce budgets, and Aramark was really working to increase their profit or revenue. And it really became kind of a values challenge for me. So I looked for a different job, and I ended up at Bethany Village, a retirement community in Dayton, Ohio, where I was the director of food services. And then I guess moved up in the ladder. I often say if you can manage food and nutrition and you understand those concepts of management and people, then you just start applying them to different fields. You just have to learn a little bit more about housekeeping, laundry, facilities, and that's really how I kind of managed through my career.
For folks who don't know, who are listening, could you explain the difference between dietetics and nutrition? How are they connected as a field?
Susan.
That is the $1 million question. We use the term registered dietitian nutritionist because that is the credential that guarantees you have somebody that comes through a route of education that's really the ground floor. They know something about it, and there's so much controversy in nutrition today. All you have to do is read the headline of the day, and everybody's got a different view. We use the term RDN, Registered Dietitian Nutritionist. People can use, and you see them written, I'm a nutritionist here, I'm a nutritionist there. It's not necessarily. In the state of Ohio, of course, we have licensure. But the Registered Dietitian Nutritionist is the mark you want to look for. It's a very difficult subject to talk about because states are different with their licensure laws and the nutrition professionals, and we feel very strongly about the need for that registered dietitian nutritionist label to be on.
Well, especially in our age of social media, you have people who are self-professed experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who may in fact be selling bogus supplements or
just wrong information, information that's not necessarily science-based or really responsible. So absolutely, the best bet is to look for a registered dietitian nutritionist or an RD. Just an RD is okay as well.
And actually, that was my thought when I was thinking about that. What's the difference? Nutrition, lots of people will claim that they know about that. Dietetics is really much more the science and the understanding of that. You wouldn't go to a physician just because they said they're a physician. You would go to somebody who's actually qualified, has the science and knowledge. And so you really want to look for somebody who has the full education and a degree in dietetics if you really want good, solid information on what to do.
That you can apply.
And could you talk a little bit, each of you, you've alluded to this with your own, entry points into the field, but how has it changed and how has the kind of science of nutrition evolved over the course of each of your careers?
Oh my, where do you start? I mean, you have to admit, we believe by and large that we're learning lots more every day. I mean, science has to be done very carefully by qualified researchers that understand good science. Nutrition is such a hot topic today. And so one of the ways it's changed is that you have many people giving their views because we all eat and we think we know something based on what we've read. So there's no question it has changed dramatically. But you can't forget about the importance of good science. And that is done by a qualified nutrition professional that really understands it and how it applies.
I would also say that if you look over the last 30 or 40 years, obesity in America is rampant. And I think that there's been a much more understanding of how chronic disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, truly are connected to obesity and what you eat and how active you are.
Right. It is our number one nutrition problem all over the world, and it's particularly a problem of obesity in the United States. And you look at all the major diseases, as Judy said, and you look at heart disease, diabetes, all of the different conditions we have, you can almost trace those back to obesity.
Well, and we're learning, part of what you're getting at is with science, it's always evolving. And we're in a time where people are getting more skeptical because it's like, well, now you're telling me this. It's like, well, that's how science works.
Whose science are we talking about is the question.
Yeah.
It's scientifically based. who's science?
I had this conversation with my husband through the pandemic. This is what science is. It evolves over time.
That's right.
And that's how we learn about it. And that's how
exactly right.
further substantiate what is really right and how things modify and change. So it's not easy for us to live through science. I guess, you could talk about history being the same. You always see it differently in hindsight than when you're living through it.
Also, if you look at a simple way to educate people is, here's what we know about a disease or a condition or a nutrient. Here's what we don't know. But here's what I'd recommend you do. And you will get that kind of advice from a registered dietitian.
I'm thinking, too, about even the conversation around obesity has changed dramatically recently, where we're understanding the role of stress in kind of the way metabolism works and the kind of effects of sort of certain...
The microbiome, the gut.
And the gut is sort of this huge new frontier for
frontier.
understanding. Ulcers used to be understood as a stress response, and now we understand that bacteria is involved in that and all of that. So,
correct.
Yeah, the world has changed as we learn new things, and it will continue to change.
Right.
But I would also add, I think our careers speak to that as well. As dietetics is even so much more than just that science of nutrition and disease. So, that education, the speech, the people that work in media, the production of food and how food is produced, Abbott Labs and formula and all of these things, that there are so many opportunities when you have that base knowledge and understand systems and process and science that you can apply to many, many fields.
There is a growing interest, too, in agriculture, and how it ties into nutrition.
Absolutely.
As well as the profession of dietetics, how food's grown, how it's harvested, how it's distributed, how it's sold. All of that makes a big difference in terms of people's knowledge and the things they believe in. So I think the net is broad. We capture a lot of opportunities, I think, for nutrition professionals and dietitians, but we also know that the interest from the consumer is broad. And so it's constantly keeping up on the newest thing. And what are people reading, and how do they understand what to do? Honestly, for most dietitians, if it's not harmful, we just let it go. If it's harmful, then we step up and be a little bit more assertive in recommending things to people.
Susan, could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes.
And what inspired you to write it? What were you hoping to add to the conversation?
I wanted to write it because I wanted to inspire dietitians, particularly those starting out or wanting to change their careers in some way. I wanted to inspire them about the important opportunities there are ahead. As Judy said, I think we're doing so many more things, and I wanted to give them some inspiration from exploring that. I think most of us today have to create our own paths to things. It's very rare you just open up LinkedIn or another opportunity on social media and find that exact thing you're looking for. Most generally, you get into an opportunity and you grow it. It's about creating that value once you get in. So I wanted to inspire them to do that. And to do that, I interviewed 30 different people, trendsetters, change agents in the field, and I had them comment on that. And it was just inspirational to listen to them about what they were doing and how they were doing it. And so I hope to be able to convey that to people starting out or people just wanting to change what they do.
Judy, could you talk a bit about the specific mission and programs at GraceWorks and how, you alluded to the notion of working someplace where you felt like your values weren't aligning. Could you talk about maybe that as well as the role of your values in your work?
Mm-hmm. So GraceWorks Lutheran Services, our mission is to help people experience dignity and wholeness in relationship with God, family, and community. And we primarily are a residential provider for services for older adults or people with disabilities. So we operate 60 sites in Southwest Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. 1,100 employees work at GraceWorks. So definitely our values influence our culture, and we express that through a concept called faithful caring. People being compassionate in their work, having competence, practicing the GraceWorks values, and then helping people achieve stability and balance in their lives, because ultimately that helps everybody around them. So Bethany Village is one of our is the retirement community, and we serve 700 people in the Dayton area, all levels of independence, from independent to nursing, home health, And we also support 700 individuals at affordable housing, older adults in affordable housing, and then the individuals with disabilities. And I was thinking earlier today, I had the opportunity to meet with Congressman Jordan at one of our affordable housing properties and talking to some of our seniors about the SNAP program or their food benefit that was being reduced coming out of COVID. And one of the ladies said, my husband and I are going to get $25 in SNAP when this is taken away, and we only make $700 a month. So essentially, our options are going to be turning to food pantries. Mm-hmm. And another one of the ladies said, in those food pantries offer so many carb, boxed, high-salt items, it's no wonder that people on low incomes are suffering from obesity and health problems when their food options are so limited. And it was just really certainly a wake-up call about food insecurity in our country and the importance of GraceWorks work to help people access resources so that they can live a healthier and more stable life.
Well, and there too, right, you're suggesting the relationship, food is part of a whole ecosystem, right, of economics and social relations and health.
And if you look at how people today, people don't prepare food at home. They order it in, or they order it out, or they go out. We have a lack, I think, of really basically the old home economic skills in cooking. And, Martha Stewart made a lot of money off of basically what was home economics. She did it. And there is no reason we shouldn't be teaching people how to do some of those kinds of things, either as a hobby or as kind of a part of your lifestyle and the way you eat. We have way too many people buying things on the fly, and that's what children get used to. Mm-hmm. So there's a big push towards, I think, greater attention to basic living skills.
Judy, I'd like to follow up on your role on the BGSU Board of Trustees. Could you talk about your priorities in that role and what your vision is for BGSU as a public university, contributing to the public good?
So I started on the board in September. So I would say I'm still in a big learning curve. And for me, one, being back at the university and the energy around that has just been wonderful. Seeing some of the changes, that's been great. Connecting with the students and the faculty to learn more about what's going on, because my work is mostly with older adults. Mm-hmm. So even to understand the demographics of a different age group and some of the competitive challenges and what the strategy of the university is. As a board of trustee member, you're working to help support the vision and strategy and drive that. But I love the public good tagline when I think about Bowling Green. I think it's about, inspiring and supporting young or really any individual to find their career path and have a passion for what they're going to do. And then, essentially and hopefully impacting the world. I mean, maybe that's impacting Ohio, maybe that's impacting the community that they're in. But all of us, if we leave the world a better place than what we found it, then we've impacted the public good. And so how I can support that remains to be seen, because as I said, I feel like I'm still learning. I described to somebody that first meeting was just like drinking out of a faucet, because there's just so much to learn about a different business than where I currently work. But
many of the challenges that you've already talked about are ones that, we were talking about on campuses too. We have a new Falcon food pantry to meet the needs of undergrad and graduate students, and sometimes faculty and staff as well, who are food insecure in various ways. So I imagine kind of the sort of that life cycle and that sort of attention to the ecosystem in which food fits in. You'll bring a lot to that conversation.
Yeah, I noticed in Susan's book, she was talking about food insecurity, and when the food stamp program started, how many people in America were on that program versus how many are today. And it just makes you step back as a food professional or somebody that works in that area and say, what, something has to not be working with our system that we have that many Americans that are
food insecure.
Yeah. And young people going to school and having to be on free breakfast and get food during the summer because they don't have those options. It's a pretty basic
and
human
many
need.
Don't realize it. Yeah, absolutely. There are pockets of people that have these issues. And I think that's one thing about dietetics is that we can help in that area. Not only people that maybe have some controversial topics that they are interested in, but also helping with hunger issues. And that's a real public health, community health issue.
Yeah, I mean, we see that so often it's kind of invisible to folks, right? Because it isn't it isn't like in the Great Depression or something where you're seeing, bread lines, but it is this way of not having access to
It's the same
nutrition,
issue.
right? To healthy food, to fruits and vegetables, especially, right? It's you mentioned kind of like if you are using a food pantry, often it is pasta, things like that, and so food insecurity may look different than many people are used to thinking about what hunger looks like.
Correct.
And
I think that's right.
Back to Susan's point, this goes back to home economics. I mean, how many young people are being taught to cook versus warm something
If
up
their
in the
mothers
microwave?
and fathers are, that it's
Right.
pretty difficult, or if they're in a single-parent family, it's pretty difficult to teach kids that. And so, there's some things in the past that really help with the future. And that's a bit of a message in my book. If you want to really look at where things are today, take a look at the past, because there's certain things that are absolutely repeating itself.
Well, we see that with the rise of community gardens and things. People returning to, small plots of land to supplement and bring things in. So, there is a way.
Mark Twain has a very good statement about that. He said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. Yeah. And I think that is exactly right, how important it is to look back. And I make a big point of that in my book of we can learn a lot from history. A lot.
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today, I'm talking with Susan Finn and Judy Budi about nutrition and the public good. Judy, for you, what was it like transitioning from your work in dietetics and nutrition to a nonprofit leadership role? What were some of the exciting things about that? Were there particular challenges?
Probably the hardest thing is not really being around the field enough. So I still maintain my registration and certification to be a dietitian. But when you're not practicing in the field, how you get those hours and what you're interested in does change. And so that's been a challenge. But from the actual work, as I mentioned, when you understand food service management, and some people talk about how it's a pretty stressful job because you 3 times a day, you're getting that food ready and getting it out. A restaurant only maybe does dinner, so you have that kind of time. But once you understand people and process and financials, you just start applying those to different fields. So, and sometimes people ask me, like, how did you make that transition? And I would say, always look for opportunities to get outside your comfort zone, participate on a committee, do something, lead a project that maybe you didn't think you knew anything about, but you really just understand about how to manage a project and people, and you work through that. And that also demonstrates to other people in the organization in which you work that you have skills that they may not have understood that you had until you had the opportunity to display them. So it's just really through that process that I took on additional programs and leadership.
Yeah.
The other thing I get asked is, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
did you plan on being a CEO? And I really didn't. It was only probably 18 months before my boss retired, and knowing that they were going to be looking for somebody, that I started to think, could I do this role and am I ready for it? So
found her own path. That's how it's done. When I shifted from university, because I was teaching as my doctorate, to business, there's a lot of learning in that.
I'm sure.
And I moved over in the 70s. And we were just introducing our first adult nutrition product at Abbott. We were introducing Ensure, or what became Ensure. And I was on that team that worked on that. And it was a big difference. But you transfer your skills, your dietetic skills, your understanding of the science. All the marketing and pieces kind of came along, as Judy said, with experience. And you try it out and you begin to learn. But learning that environment in the private sector from a university or a public health is a big jump. It's a big jump, but you learn.
One of those skills is really how you read information and decipher fact from fiction, right? What's real, and that comes from nutrition. What's really the science versus what is not. And I think that helps you as you learn new
You're
things.
right, Judy, and I think especially in a science-based industry, which Abbott and any pharmaceutical companies relies. That's what they rely on, good science. So those are really good spots for nutrition professionals.
And I mean, how do you think about This makes me think about kind of the role of education generally, right? That when we hear these, laments right now, is college worth the financial cost, right?
Sure.
But I think one of the things that folks like me think a lot about is that we're not teaching you how to do a thing. We're teaching you how to think and be able to adapt to the stuff you don't know what's going to happen. Could you speak to that? Like what role you see education playing, whether it's in a specific field like dietetics and nutrition, or if someone's majoring in something else, the role of education in preparing for the things you don't see coming?
You're absolutely right. You're the comment of you're preparing people to think. For many generations, that's why people did liberal arts education, because it prepared them to look. You're taking a philosophy course. What's it preparing you for? An English course. What's it preparing you for? It's preparing you to think and appreciate where you've been and where you're going. Absolutely, it's essential. And education plays a key role in helping open up that world of thinking. I mean, you learn to read, you learn to different views, you learn to speak about what somebody may think, you learn to discuss an issue, civilly debate an issue. All those things are learned through your experience as a student. That's where most of us learn that. And then as you go on and narrow your specialty, you begin to recognize it is about lifelong learning. Dietitians, of course, have to do lifelong learning. It's, as Judy said, it's part of our certification, it's part of keeping our license and our registration. But it has to be an integral part of what you do. You absolutely have to continue that on. And again, not only to keep your credential, but to keep good, to keep on the cutting edge. Things are changing so fast. I mean, the whole AI opportunity is opened up. What is it we're going to do? Are we going to be removed because of it? All of those kinds of things are top of mind to everybody today. So jobs will change. You've got to be educated. You've got to keep your skills sharp, your knowledge sharp, but you got to learn to adapt. And I believe that's what college teaches you.
As a real world example in our organization, and for someone to be as a director or an executive level, they do have to have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. And there are some people who've worked in the field for 20 years that don't have that will challenge that. Mm-hmm. Like, why is experience not worth a degree? How can you say a degree is more important than experience? And it really does come down to the complex thinking. And, it's not necessarily that people that don't go to college don't think, because everybody's offered different opportunities in life. But it is that kind of overall thinking and logic. And you mentioned philosophy that I think add to that. It's the commitment to lifelong learning. So I think those are some of the things that I would add to it that really do make it a real life. But you got to find your passion. Because I can remember when we all graduated from our internship and we were all, going to make sure we got that perfect job. And 3 years later, every single one of us were working someplace else. And so
that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So, what is the perfect job? Right. And, many people that change careers as they go through, it's you figure out your passion, but that basic understanding and education gave you the basis to be able to navigate through that.
Choices.
How do you see, for both of you and in your different roles, your work in nutrition as working toward the public good? What role, I guess, we've touched on this, but maybe you could say more about the role of nutrition and dietetics in the public good.
I will just say that if you do not smoke excessively or smoke at all, if you do not drink excessively, nutrition is the most important thing you can do for your health. And so when you talk about young women, when you talk about pregnant women, when you talk about families, it's the most important thing you can do for your health. So we have a mandate, a role to play in helping people understand basic health and basic nutrition and wellness information. It's just going to be part of building a solid life, healthy life. So I think that's related. That's generally the issue of public good to me.
And I think it's not necessarily, even if you're at an institution or a hospital, you do that through interactions you have with anybody in your life that you can encourage or influence. And sometimes it's also just helping them not dispute the science that they may be reading on social media, but helping them step back and maybe see the bigger picture. Everything in moderation actually does help. In that diet that severely limits you to anything you want to eat, and then 3 months later you go off of it and you're yo-yoing back and forth, is more dangerous than people just maintaining a solid weight for their lifetime. So I think you influence the health of anybody in your circle because of that.
I think that's right, Judy. And I think ever try to convince somebody that their ideas are wrong about what they eat, it's a tough job. So the best you can do is try to guide them into what you think are some basic principles, and because it's very difficult to get people to change off how they feel about food.
Well, and I'm curious, I mean, one of the things we know with food is that it isn't only about, for people choosing what to eat, it isn't only about sustenance, right? It is about culture, it is about comfort, it is about a lot of other things.
Right.
So how has the field evolved to sort of maybe address some of those things, the regional variations, ethnic or cultural foodways, and the role of that in creating a healthy sort of balanced diet?
Well, I can speak from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. We have about 100,000 dietitians in this country. We have grown dramatically in our international membership, and we have liaisons with many countries with joint collaborative efforts. So that's one way. We bring a lot of different international people to our meetings. We have a lot of externships and internships and experiences where we involve people. So there is a real desire to get to understanding people's culture. We also have fellowships that are given to members and to our students that go all over the world to do projects. We have them in all kinds of countries working on a specific project. So there's a lot of experience now of giving students and professionals an opportunity to see the way other cultures live. Big emphasis on it.
And I would just say it goes back to what Susan said before. You know, dietetics isn't about saying you must eat this or you have to do this. It's teaching people within their world, very, very person-centered, very individually focused, how they can adapt their life to live healthier. So I think understanding those cultures, understanding all the aspects that are influencing what they eat, whether it's stress, whether it's their working nights and they're eating their big meal, and whatever that is, and then adapting the plan to be very individualized.
Right. And I'm thinking in your work with GraceWorks, I imagine, preparing food for such great numbers of people, you're dealing with a lot of different, not only, health-related dietary needs, but also those foodways, those preferences. What kinds of principles guide that?
And even the other thing we're dealing with, when you hire caregivers in their 20s to work at a group home and prepare people food that have disabilities, one, getting everybody active is important, but the cooking skills of the people you hire, if they don't know how to cook for their own family, how then they cook someplace else? Home health has that challenge. For older adults, you may have somebody that's 80 that loves to eat healthy, but if their caregiver that's working for them doesn't know how to cook, that's a challenge. So I think some of it goes back to that. And then I would also add, I was thinking about corporate wellness. So, in our role as we look at our corporate wellness program, how are we going to encourage good health amongst our employees? I think my knowledge of nutrition and dietetics also influences that. And it's not just food, it's also sleeping, stress reduction, activity, all that.
Going back to the issue of how you learn about other food habits. One of the dietitians that I interviewed in my book works for Google, and she's in charge of food service for about 57 countries. She does meal planning for them. And I asked her that very question, how do you determine what the food's choices are? And she says, local people tell me. They give me, I have them look at what I'm preparing. She does 3 meals a day, roughly, for 57 countries, the planning of that. Phenomenally interesting job. But I said, how do you do that? And she says, I get local people to help me.
And I think that's important because some of the food celebrations that we did when I worked at Aramark, 30 years ago, wouldn't be appropriate today with the DEI initiatives, So really understanding culture and what are foods that educate and assist that versus what are really some culturally sensitive things. You have to be aware of that too.
That's exactly right. And we have a lot more emphasis on getting diversity into our membership. And we are doing some work in that area. We've made great progress, and we still have more work to do.
Well, because like education, right? If I'm not mistaken, like the typical dietitian and nutritionist is a white woman, and yet the needs, and just sort of like in K-12, I think it's 80% are white women, and yet the actual population is going to be the true cross-section of America.
Well, we have about 3% men in our field.
Okay. So there's work to, so part of it is trying to get more folks to see themselves in being part of the conversation.
Yes. And nutrition, dietetics is a STEM field. And so we are trying very desperately to bring people in to recognize the science behind it and how important that is.
Yeah, STEM is more than engineering.
Yes,
There's also
it is.
This whole medical and health piece that goes with it.
That's exactly right.
And just as a kind of plug for the humanities, we know how important it is to add in the cultural competency, to being able to communicate effectively with people, that none of these things actually work in isolation, right? It really is a wide set of skills and habits of thought.
One of my favorite classes as an undergraduate was foods of other cultures.
Yeah.
And so,
It's a great class.
Every week we cooked, this was Asian food, or this was, all these other cultures. So, as growing up in a small town in Ohio, I didn't have the opportunity to experience that. So that was great.
Exactly. One of the women that I interviewed, she runs the Detroit Food Council. And she was an engineer, computer expert, working for the automobile industry. She wasn't a dietitian. She got very interested, particularly in the cultural aspect of it, and became a dietitian. Midlife.
How would you encourage listeners to get more involved in issues around nutrition and public health? Are there organizations? Are there particular things they can just do for themselves that you would encourage them? Judy?
Wow, there's just so many different ways. I mean, I guess one would be don't just use social media as your basis for learning about it. But then, you could get involved in your community food bank or ways to support hunger in your community. That's what I'm saying. There's just so many different ways you could look at corporate wellness and the approach to that, what your local supermarket's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many areas that you could connect with that could give back to the community and the greater good.
You bet. And I think, you look at your community organizations, your diabetes, your heart, cancer clinics, all of those have dietitians. Those would be the first places I'd go. Read broadly and have your questions outlined, and then talk to people about those questions. And there's controversies all the time. And what you want to do is provide good information to people, and that's where you go to a registered dietitian to get that information. That's what I would do. I'd find one. I'd seek one out.
As we begin wrapping up, I'm thinking about for younger listeners, so maybe, folks who are currently students at BGSU or very recent graduates, any advice for them could be around the field of nutrition or just sort of preparing for lifelong learning and a career ahead. Susan?
Gosh, what would I recommend a young person do? I think that first of all, find out what your passion is. People do best what they love to do. I know I can tell you that I never had a day when I didn't want to go to that office to do something because I thought it was really important. That's passion. So find out what you like to do and follow that dream, because within that dream, you will find something that opens a door and that can provide a wonderful career for you. So I think that would be the first thing, is passion and persevere. Don't let a door close on you. Keep going on it, because those are qualities that make for success.
I would absolutely agree with that. I would add that, your career is not just 5 years. It's not 10 years. It's 30 years. So be patient, look for opportunities, and then just don't stop learning.
No.
and get involved in professional organizations within your profession or community organizations that can help you be exposed to different people, different professions, and a network that will help connect you to opportunities. So those would be my words of advice.
Great. Listeners can find out more about GraceWorks by going to their website at graceworks.org. You can also keep up with ICS happenings by following us on Twitter and Instagram at ICS-BGSU or on our Facebook page. And you can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. For more information, you can visit us at bgsu.edu/BG-Ideas. This episode was sound engineered by Brendan Akatura and Marco Mendoza. Research assistance and writing for this episode were provided by Joe Alaya.